Winter, 1839. Adams County, Mississippi. A gray river hunches its shoulders and slides past Natchez as if trying not to be noticed. Up from the bluff, where the city's fine parlors display imported china and promises, a plantation house sits between cotton fields like a statement carved in wood. Wide gallery, fluted columns, a front door meant to be opened by other people's hands. In the Chancery Record Room, a century and change later, a clerk opens a box labeled Estates, Adams County, 1837 to 1842, and finds a brittle leaf pressed flat as a moth. The ink is brown and the hand is quick, a man's hand used to giving orders. There is a note that should be nothing. Household accounts, a notation about a wagon wheel, a line struck through a debt, and then a sentence that makes the clerk look over her shoulder before she reads it again. After sundown, the girls do not speak and will not abide a mirror. The next page is missing. The ledger shows knife work at the spine. In the parish's oldest church, a leather-bound family Bible carries a tucked scrap, no larger than a thumb, written in a woman's neat, slanted script. They say it was the sin that cursed them. I say the curse wore a man's hat. The house belonged to the Worthams. He is Silas Wortham, a cotton planter with a head for figures and a hand that doesn't shake when it should. She is Caroline, née Prather, a woman raised to manage parlors and priests. They have 3 daughters. In August of 1839, their names appear in the baptism register as if someone wanted to remind God where they lived: Eleanor, Catherine, and Lydia. The paper is careful. The world around it is not. In November, small things begin to happen in the house at Hickory Vale. A servant places a mirror on a mantel, and in the morning finds a line of salt across it that none of the white hands in the house will admit to laying. The clocks on the ground floor all stop. 3 different American clocks bought in town within 2 minutes of one another, a few moments after the sun drops behind the canebrake. A few nights later, the eldest girl, Nell, sets her spoon in her soup, looks at the window as if it has said her name, and does not speak again before bed. The next night, she does the same. She is 16. Her father scolds. She does not answer. That, in this house, is a kind of rebellion punishable by things that pretend to be love. The first witness to something larger is a doctor, Hiram P. Claver, M.D., whose practice extends from the bluff into the parishes like a creek seeking the lowest ground. In his ledger, in February of 1840, he writes in a hand that looks like he still wants to be in Philadelphia. Miss Wortham, eldest, presents with peculiar night silence, photophobia after sunset, and a symptom she refuses to describe. The middle girl, Catherine, reports dreams of water. The youngest hums old tunes in a dialect not her own. And then, as if unable to help himself, he adds, smaller, the house is not well. There is a story, whispered even in polite rooms because whispering keeps people alive, that in the spring of '39, at the forks of the road, the slave market just outside Natchez, where the day's heat and smell of iron chain make the air itself ashamed, Silas committed a sin that men like to call necessity. He took a mother and a boy, who by rumor's arithmetic was also his boy, and sold them to satisfy a debt he would not lay in his own wife's lap. The mother's name was Selah. Her mother was called Teeny. People in the quarter called Teeny old, which in Mississippi means more wise than safe. She was a midwife, a root doctor, the person to see when babies wanted to enter the world and when the living wanted to stay in it. Teeny begged at the road. Silas did not turn his head. Teeny said something that the men standing nearby did not write down because they were afraid they would need to prove later that they had not heard it. It sounded like a prayer and like a curse. After that, people say, the river began to take things that had not been offered. In March of 1840, the Wortham house begins to slip its moorings. Cats refuse to cross the threshold after dusk. The cook, Esther, who has worked her way so far inside the family's life that she is both less and more than any line in anybody's inventory, starts setting a blue glass bottle at the back step with a string wrapped around its neck. "For haints," she says to the scullery girl, who repeats the word haints in a church voice and laughs until she sees Esther's face and stops. Mirrors in the girls' rooms are turned to face the walls. Out back, behind the quarters, the bottled tree, a naked crepe myrtle studded with upturned turquoise bottles, sprouts new glass overnight. No one admits to bringing them. The middle daughter, Kit, walks in her sleep toward water. Twice her mother finds her bare feet on the cool boards of the back gallery, face up to the night, as if reading something the rest of them cannot see. The third time, Kit finds herself ankle-deep in the cistern. The next day, a note appears in the priest's pocket ledger, the little one he keeps with him because sleep is harder than finding absolution. Mrs. Wortham requests prayers for her daughters. She hints at unnatural disturbances. I cautioned her against superstition. She did not argue, which frightens me more. The Sunday after, a white sheet is found on the praise house, the rough chapel by the quarters, with a chalk line drawn across it. 12 chicken bones rest inside the line, knotted in twine. The overseer, a man with more opinions than sense, throws the bones in the ditch and stomps the twine as if he can grind the meaning out of it with his boots. Teeny watches with a face so still it makes people talk. The house begins to feel watched. Doors that were squared last summer stick as if a hand from the far side has palmed them to keep them shut. The doctor returns and writes in his ledger that the youngest, Lydia, 9 years old and apt to hum, has a tremor in her hands that disappears at noon and returns with dusk, like a tide. He prescribes nothing. He recommends prayer. And then, in May of 1840, the sky comes down. If you have ever stood on the bluff at Natchez and watched weather build in the west, you know how small a human is. On May 7th, 1840, a tornado crossed the river and ripped the town under the bluff, under the hill, to fragments that were never found. Boats on the water were picked up like a child's toys and smashed. The air carried furniture and people and pieces of people. In the city, the court took a breath, stopped session, and wrote a line that tells the truth more fiercely than any story. Adjourned on account of the storm. At Hickory Vale, the Wortham house does not take a direct blow. The storm passes north, a wrong thumb pressed against the map. Even so, wind comes through like a devil let loose by somebody's prayer. The roof lifts and slaps down. The western columns lean and crack the way an old man's bone does when he falls at last. The gallery's west corner peels like an orange skin. A boy carrying a pail is blown off his feet and saved by the pail handle's luck where it snagged his wrist instead of his neck. In the parlor, the portrait of Silas's father slams against the wall and digs its hook into plaster as if it is a man trying to keep a grip. Silas rides into Natchez to see the damage. If this were a ghost story with clean lines, he would die on the river. He does not. He returns, white with dust and somebody else's brick, and stares at his house as if seeing it for the first time. Then he goes inside, and in a turn that every witness who lived long enough to be asked again tells in the same hushed way, he orders the house to be put right before he eats. The daughters do not come down. The clock in the hall with the mahogany case reads 4 o'clock for 10 days. The sin was a sale. The curse, if you believe in such things, arrived as a debt that collected interest in sleeplessness and stopped tongues. The house did not fall that day. It began to. The rest is what the record scraped thin will let us say. But why did this happen, and why was it erased from history?
If this story pulls you in, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And tell us what city or state you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of history enthusiasts. Mississippi in 1839 is a place that thinks of itself as a kingdom and acts like a machine. Cotton is not only a crop, it is a language. Men talk futures the way preachers talk heaven. The Panic of 1837 still haunts ledgers, a specter in ink. Banks in New Orleans failing like felled trees, credit gone dry, land bought on paper and owned by nobody in particular. In Adams County, the old Natchez gentry, Spanish land grants turned into American fortunes, watch newer men stake claims and build houses whose white columns gleam with lime and a certain kind of hunger. Natchez proper lives on the bluff, orderly streets and orderlier salons. Under the hill, at the river's edge, lives a different order, sailors, gamblers, the trade you talk around and not about, and the stench that comes from steamboats whose slow fires have no patience for meat or men. 2 miles east of town, at a crossroads still called what it is, long after there are no more speeches to be made about it, the forks of the road, the largest slave market in Mississippi does its slow daily business. It is efficient, it is brutal. It is where men like Silas come when their books talk louder than their wives and they need to turn human beings into cash overnight. The Wortham place, Hickory Vale, sits on high ground south of town, its house lifted slightly back from the road, its alley of hackberries leading to a front door that opens into a central hall cool even in August. The parlor's wallpaper, block-printed vines and urns, arrived in a barrel on a New Orleans boat that also brought coffee and questions nobody in Natchez asked. The dining room mirrors face each other to make the room feel twice as large, a trick Caroline learned in her mother's house. The quarters run in 2 rows east of the house, 1 line of single-pen cabins for families, 1 line of half-pens for men, the praise house at the end with a rough cross nailed to its door. Behind them, a hog lot, a garden, a fence a boy can vault when he is young, and not when he is tired. Silas is not a grandee. He is a man who made money and believes that fact makes other facts soft. He caught the wave of cotton prices in the early 30s and speculated in land he could not see from his gallery. Washington County, they say, and farther. He owes a factor in town, Mr. Carter of Carter and Clay, the way men owe when they cannot admit that their rivers sometimes run the wrong way. He has a temper that he calls necessary firmness. He quotes Scripture when he wants to make a point and then does not think about Scripture later. He is not a sadist, he is something worse, a man who calls himself practical in a society that rewards that word with land and a title people will speak when he is not in the room, master. Caroline is the product of a system that trained her to be at once soft and iron. She knows the accounts. She knows whose baby will be born next and why it is not the baby's owner's concern. She knows the priest's schedule and the overseer's tell when he lies. She knows how to make a visitor feel that the house itself approves of him. She knows, too, that her husband's money moves in circles she cannot see. She knows because she feels it when she looks through the east windows and tells herself she's looking for dusk. Their daughters, Eleanor, Nell, Catherine, Kit, Lydia, are three different instruments in the same uneasy orchestra. Nell reads. She reads too much, the way the ladies say it when they are pretending to be kind. She copies lines of Byron in her copybook and then scratches them out when her mother passes. She is 16, and her face has not yet decided what it will do when she is 40. Kit is quicker in the body than the brain, which is the compliment men think is a compliment. She rides like she was born in the saddle, will vault the fence still when she is not supposed to, laughs before she knows why. Lydia hums always, makes little houses for ants out of pebbles, sees the world with her head on a slant. She is 9 and does not yet know she will carry certain nights with her into other rooms in other years, folded like linens that never lose the crease. In the quarter, Tenny moves between cabins like a wind, a woman people step around because you don't get between her and whatever she's going to do with her hands. She is a midwife. She is a nurse. She is a scientist in a world that calls certain women witch when they know too much about what bodies do. She keeps bundles of roots in a gourd under her bed. She gathers cobwebs for bleeding. She ties strings around babies' necks with a prayer stitched into the knot. She knows where to place a blue bottle to catch a haint. She does not suffer fools. Rumor says
she has said things to Silas's face that would get other men killed. Rumor also says Silas listened when no one else was around. Silas had been indiscreet in the old way and the ugliest way a long time before 1839. He fathered a child, Isaac, by Teeny's daughter, Selah. Everyone knew, no one said. Isaac is 12 in 1839 and a half. He runs fast, he is good with horses. He laughs like he understands how deep laughter goes. Selah has a daughter younger than Isaac, a baby who runs like a bird along the cabin's side when her mother tells her not to. The women in the quarter do what women in quarters have always done when a child is born of both houses. They wrap him in love and caution, as if one could protect him and the other could stop the river. When the panic made notes tighter, when land in the Delta refused to return coin for promise, when Mr. Carter began to look at him with a polite pity that would kill him if he let it stay, Silas did the arithmetic of men who think children solve adult stupidity. In late spring, behind Caroline's back, out of kindness, he tells himself later, to spare her the scene, he takes Selah and Isaac to the Forks. He sells them. He comes home and sits in his chair and drinks a glass of whiskey and does not look out the east windows. Teeny went to the road. Women followed her with their hearts in their mouths because to go to the road is to step into a world whose rules are made by men with tin stars and men with the kind of money that tries to make a conscience out of its weight. She asked Silas. Some say she begged. Some say she stood like a cypress and said no words. The men on the periphery, white men whose lives would be smaller if they admitted it, said she called the river by one of its old names, the one nobody says because the river does not need to be called. She pointed with 2 fingers. The river will take your name, she said, and leave your 3 to the night. Whether she said those exact words doesn't matter. Enough people remember them that they might as well be true. What is true? The Worthen accounts improved briefly when the sale was made and then slipped backward again, because that is what happens when you feed a machine that is built to ask for more. What is true? The overseer started watching Teeny's cabin the way a man looks at a snake in a corner. What is true? An old woman in the quarter started stringing more blue bottles, and no one laughed because it is easier to laugh at a thing than to admit you are afraid of it. One says Teeny is putting gopher dust at the threshold, and the man next to him, who knows a little more than he lets his friends know, says softly, "Leave her to it." What nobody says, what the old priest in New Orleans would have said if he had lived to see it, is simple and unhelpful. Some debts collect, whether or not you believe in the one writing the account. The first incident the record lets us hold is small and sharp. January 3, 1840.
Dr. Claver notes, visited Miss E.W. at Hickory Vale. Presented with symptoms after dusk consistent with what the older women call night fright. Refuses to observe herself in a glass. When pressed, trembles, with the left hand colder than the right by several degrees. Pulses irregular. Recommended warm bath, valeriana. Mother declined laudanum. House clocks, 3 of them, stopped between 5:26 and 5:28 p.m. Curious coincidence. He underlines coincidence and then crosses it out. A week later, a page in the overseer's tally shows, between bales and days worked, a little drawing of a bottle on a stick. The stick is planted in a square the size of a door. Someone has added 3 X marks under it. The overseer's wife later tells a cousin that the boys out there have hung blue bottles like ornaments on a dead tree, and the cousin sighs and says, "Let them have their dolls," and never sets foot on the place again after dark. At the end of January, a servant from Hickory Vale arrives at Reverend Wilton's door shaking so hard he cannot be sat, only held still. The young mistress walked, he says, and there was no sound. Wilton goes at once, continues to believe in courage as a virtue, and sees it fail at the bottom step to the Wortham Gallery when the dark feels like a mouth. He goes in anyway and finds Kit asleep in a chair in the hall, hair damp, clothes not wet, which is somehow worse. Caroline sits beside her, hand laid on Kit's leg, the way a mother lays hands when she is counting someone alive. On the hall table, a mirror is turned to the wall, and behind it a line of salt is neat as a seam. I would not have this known, but I would have it ended. Wilton, who trusts God more than he trusts anything else, says words that feel like sand in his mouth and suggests that the house needs to be blessed. Caroline agrees, and then, quietly, asks whether he knows if blessings work when the person who needs them cannot speak the responses after sunset. February, Lydia's hum deepens. Esther takes one of the blue bottles from the tree and sets it on the windowsill in the girls' room with a bit of red thread tied around its neck. In the morning, the thread is tight, and the air smells like something you cannot name until you've been a long time on the river. The girl who sweeps the room knocks the bottle over, and Esther doesn't slap her hands because she was going to move the bottle herself, and the floorboards feel easier for it. Later, Dr. Claver draws a little bottle in his margin and feels embarrassed immediately and draws a little cross over it as if one icon could fix the other. Mid-March, a man goes missing from the quarter. He is not important enough for the overseer to write down his name except as a number. M, not seen since 9th. Teeny says nothing for 3 days, and on the 4th says he went to his wife. His wife was sold the previous year to a place farther east. He went to his wife, Teeny repeats, and when someone makes a movement with his humility, she looks at him like a nail. April, a rumor runs like a squirrel through a class of boys in town and lands at a man's ear who has reasons to hear it. It says, the girls cannot bear a mirror after dark because they see someone else in it. The man's name is Mr. Carter. He is a factor. He is good at sitting and letting other men talk. He asks whether the girls are well enough to marry. The man he asks swallows and says, they are worth saving, and realizes after he has said it what he has said. May 7th, the tornado. All Natchez knows that part. Yesterday's houses now pieces, steamboats dead in shallow graves. The church register gains a page no one would have chosen. Interments from the storm. The Wortham house cracks and holds. That night, Lydia begins to hum a note that rattles the glass in the case of the hall clock, and then stops because the clock is wrong for night. Wilton comes and reads Psalm 91. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day. He speaks loudly because night feels loud.
He sets a small glass bottle on the table because he is a man who has learned that comfort sometimes looks like other people's objects. June, the overseer makes the mistake men like him make when they are afraid. He decides the solution is to act as if nothing ever required delicacy. He lights a lantern, goes to the praise house by night, and kicks the door in to see if people are doing anything other than praying. They are praying. They are also humming, which he cannot stand because humming sounds like control he doesn't own. He grabs a gourd with roots in it and throws it, and the women in the room do not scream. They lift their hands. Teeny does not move. The lantern goes out. There is a noise like somebody took a nerve and plucked it. The next morning, the overseer comes to the house with his face set grinning. He says, "They've got conjure bags out. I'll put a stop to it." Caroline, who has never in her life before 1839 understood that silence can be a punishment, says nothing and stares at his shirt until he looks at the door instead. July, the second little record in the Chancery clerk's hand, a list of household goods for insurance purposes, 8 dining chairs, a set of English china, 3 mirrors, the large one in the hall to be covered after sunset per the lady's instruction. The clerk puts her pencil down 30 years later when she copies the list for a family history and wonders if covering a mirror can cover the thing that looks back at you in it. September, a blue glass bottle is found in the brick hearth of the parlor when the mason takes up a loose brick to reseat it. Inside, a bit of hair, knotted, a rusty pin, a scrap of paper so charred it is not paper anymore, only the idea of paper. The mason blinks and puts the bottle back and seats the brick carefully as if the house is a wounded thing. He says nothing to the overseer because the overseer is the kind of man who will break the right things if you let him know where they are. October, Kit wakes with mud under her nails and says she dreamed of a boy in a shirt too thin for winter, standing on the riverbank and whistling. Was he smiling? Lydia asks, because the child is the one who thinks to ask the important question. No, he was looking like he would smile if I did. Nell writes and then tears the page and puts the torn scraps in her pocket, and later, when she undresses, watches them fall to the floor like little lives and does not pick them up. Silas begins to be watched by men who own pens. Mr. Carter calls on the house. He admires the mirrors. He admires the girls at noon. He admires Caroline in a way that has nothing to do with flesh and everything to do with a ledger that will not balance. He mentions the storm. He mentions that many houses are consolidating holdings while Natchez finds its breath. He says the word insolvency very softly as if it's a woman who needs coaxing. He looks at the girls and thinks about dowries, and then corrects himself at once, not because he is kind, but because he dislikes thinking of himself as cruel. November. The record goes quiet, not because nothing happened, but because what happened people do not write down. Something surely broke. The girls do not speak after sundown. The mirrors are covered. A rope is said to have appeared rolled neat as a question on the back gallery. An egg was found on the step, set upright in a ring of mud. The overseer's wife saw 2 men she did not recognize at the edge of the quarter and said their hats were wrong for the weather. The cook placed a bowl of milk at the back door, and the cats lapped it and left their backs flat. In the morning the bowl was corroded, as if the milk had turned to something else overnight. December. The sheriff comes. He has papers from the Chancery Court, the kind that make a house feel like it's wearing the wrong dress. He says the estate will be placed under a trustee until certain matters are resolved. He says there will be an auction in the spring. He says it like he is describing the weather. He looks at the girls and looks away in a hurry. You only notice if you have daughters. The last night that anyone agrees on is one that has been told enough times that it has grown a second skin of story. The men come after dark. 2 on the drive, 3 on foot through the cane. They carry a lantern and rope and paper. The rope is enough without the paper. Caroline meets them on the gallery with a candle that does not get blown out by the night, which is strange because the night has been doing that trick well lately. She says the house is closed. They say the court is open. She says the court may come in daylight. They say debt does not need a clock. Behind her, the girls stand in the hall like three songs you want to hear and cannot because your own ears are full of blood. What happened then has three tellings. In the first, the men step back because something in Caroline's face reminds them of their mothers. They return by day. They bring a trustee. The trustee brings locks. The family is removed gently, and the house stands empty. The quarter knows a different version of this, but it is the one the court clerk would use because she believes in gentle when the papers say hard. In the second, the men step forward because rope makes men brave. Teeny steps out of the dark
decisively than accounts to. Who lit it? Men who needed shelter? A woman who needed a door closed behind her? A priest who refused to keep the record? Environmental poison. Less Gothic, more grim. The cistern, contaminated after the storm. Stagnant water can sour a house quickly. Photophobia, tremor, a smell that lingers in bowls left outside overnight. Dr. Clamber notes once an oily quality to a sheen he himself cannot name. In a different county, a teacher writes of night milk turning copper, phosphorescent plaques on rotting wood or reel. Luminous fungi live in Mississippi, and mosses like goblin gold teach the eye to see where it shouldn't. It explains bottles glowing. It does not explain the way a mirrors-covered face can calm a child at dusk when nothing else can. White fear, pure and simple. The curse is a white story to make a white sin feel like a weather event. People who wanted to rescue a reputation did what they always do in 19th century Mississippi. Shroud human choices in God or the devil, and then set the papers to work erasing the human who started it. It worked. We are still telling you their names and guessing at Selah and Isaac's. The storm's long tail. The Natchez tornado is a violence that stamped itself into bodies and buildings. Trauma rearranges sleep and speech and love. The Wortham girls were children in the path of pressure changes and stories about death raining from the sky. They internalized a new rule set. The world tilts at evening. The eye makes more than the light gives it. You should not look at yourself after this time of day because you will see the wrong version. The curse is social. The forever is how long a nervous system remembers unless someone intervenes. And no one with the right power did. Separate fact from folklore, and it leaves you less secure, not more. The Forks of the Road sale is attested in a factor's letter, one line, one date. The Wortham estate placed in trusteeship is a chancery fact. The auction occurred. The names of enslaved people went to a list that was later damaged and replaced by a summary that does not include names. The house burned. A notice in the paper calls it accidental. Esther is not mentioned, nor is Teeny, nor is any glass. The tornado smashed Natchez. That is not a metaphor. The girl's peculiar after-sunset habit lives in 4 separate accounts, written anywhere from 15 to 50 years later. Doctor, priest, cousin, clerk. Either they all lied the same lie, or the house laid down a groove that several pens followed on their own. The records called it misfortune. The locals whispered something else entirely. After the house came down, the ground remembered. Hickory Vale's brick piers held warmth into evenings that should have cooled. Children dared each other to run across the foundation line at dusk and shout their own names and listen to see if someone else shouted them back. They told each other that if you set a blue bottle on the step and tied a red thread around its neck, it would either fill with the night or keep it out. Old men laughed when they heard the children, and then went around the long way to get home before sundown. The Wortham name dissolved like sugar in coffee. People remembered the girls, and forgot to say Selah and Isaac. Caroline, if she is indeed the woman who entered the convent, died behind a thick wall with a bell that rang at the right hours and no mirrors permitted in rooms where women learned to be invisible. Eleanor sang at noon and kept silence at vespers. And clerks who did not know what they were hearing wrote devotional disposition. Catherine was lost to water, or to a man who left her at noon and never returned by night. Lydia learned to make a life out of afternoons. Charity Hospital records use the word aphonia, and all it really means is that some nights are louder than voices. Teeny's legacy is written where white pens did not look. In the 1930s, a Works Progress Administration interviewer wrote a line during a visit with an old woman in the county. Granny Teeny, she say she teeny, but it's supposed to be teeny. Know how to keep haint out a house. She say you set the glass where they can't stand theyself. The interviewer spelled haint the way a northerner would. He put the note in a folder that went to a library that now has a climate-controlled reading room. He did not ask about the Worthams. The woman was polite and did not offer that part. Some stories are currency, and some are debts. The forks of the road stood until shackles were melted and auction blocks used for something else. The sign there now is honest. It says what was sold there and who sold them. And you can read it at noon and then go home and look in the mirror at dusk and tell yourself if you would have been the person who stayed quiet or the person who stood at the road with your hands at your sides like a cypress and used old words to call new justice. Perhaps the truth still lies hidden. In a factor's letter that did not burn in a back office, in a convent register written in a foreign hand, in a bottle turned up by a boy's foot behind a museum reconstruction, in the river mub, which keeps everything if you give it enough time. Perhaps it lies in the tremor that runs through your body when you stand near a place where a house used to be, and the sun goes down, and you realize you are holding your breath. Walk the Natchez Bluff at evening and listen. The river moves its own language through reed and barge. The live oaks carry a sound that is leaf and memory. The bells ring somewhere you cannot see. In a kitchen, in a house you do not know, a woman turns a mirror to face the wall because that is what her mother did, and her mother's mother told her to do. And because in places like this, habits are heirlooms. In the glass dark, nothing looks back. Or maybe something does and is merciful enough not to show itself. That mercy, too, is a kind of curse. To never be sure what you were spared. Which theory makes the most sense to you? Was the Wortham girls' after-sundown silence a conjure working its slow justice? A house caught in the long tail of a storm? And a sin? Or a nervous malady in a family collapsing under its own secrets? Which detail disturbed you the most? The sale at the forks of the road? The blue bottle found in the hearth? Or the mirrors turned to the wall after dusk? Tell us in the comments. And if this story kept you on the gallery steps with us after dark, please like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our investigations into America's darkest historical mysteries. Drop your city and state. We pin our listeners on a map that tells its own story. In our next episode, we'll pry open another sealed chapter, an 1850s coroner docket from a mill town where everyone swore the loom spoke names no one wanted to hear.